What is going on, guys? It is Steve here. We're in Motortown Behind the Wheel, and today we're going to be talking about my Atlas and the tune I have selected for it, the different components in that tune, and then we're also going to be giving a breakdown of the components themselves because there is a lot of confusion about what these things actually do and how they actually affect the vehicles in this game. So I'm going to be giving it a rundown, giving you my best educated definition and explanation of these different components, and talking about why I picked what I picked for this Atlas tune to do heavy iron. This is completely designed around being able to take the heaviest iron loads that you can get in the game, which I believe is around 66.3, 66.5 ton gross vehicle weight. So it's heavy. But let's get into this. We're going to talk about powertrain first. Let's just start at the top of the list. Coolant radiator. This is really basic, right? The radiator is responsible for cooling the engine. A bigger one is better at cooling the engine. It's going to keep the temps lower for longer and allow you to kind of ride the upper end of the rev range without worrying about over-temping the engine too much. Intake, so short versus long here. Now if we look at our dynamometer graph down here, our dyno, we can see the short intake provides us about 650 horsepower at 2330 RPMs and 2700 Newton meters of torque at 1180 RPMs. Now these are maxes. So we look at the long intake, it's got 644 horsepower at 2190 RPM and let's call it 2900 Newton meters of max torque at 1180 RPM. Now, bigger numbers are better. Straight up is what it is. We want torque in this truck. We are hauling heavy loads. If you think about torque versus power, consider a heavy object. Your torque is what is going to move that object. So the more torque you have, the heavier the object you're going to be able to move. The power is how fast you'll be able to move that object. So more power, push that thing faster. Said we're a big heavy work truck. We're not worried about going fast, so we're after torque. Let's get to the engine. It just makes sense, right? Everything I just said, big boy engine. This being designed for heavy iron loads, I don't think it's doable with the smaller engines. You could probably get away with taking less units of iron and coal with the smaller engines, but big boy engine. So turbochargers, if we look here, stock versus stage 1. Stock 590 horsepower, stage 1 644 horsepower, stock 2600 Newton meters of torque, about 2700, and stage 1 about 2900. It just makes sense to go for the stage 1. It's more power, it's more torque. I saw an argument, something about the stock coming on a little sooner, it spools up a little faster and you get that torque a little quicker, but 50 RPM is negligible at best. It will not make a difference. You want the bigger numbers. You're going to need the bigger numbers for heavy loads, so stage 1 all day. Transmissions. This is where we start to get a little bit long-winded here, so if you want to learn about how transmissions kind of work, then by all means stick around. If not, please feel free to skip ahead. The 5-6 speeds are off the board here. They just don't work for heavy iron. You're not going to have fun. I go with the 13 speed simply because I don't like shifting that much. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I'm a bit lazy. I don't like pressing the buttons that much. I don't like thinking about what gear I'm in and why that much. It's a lot of more brain power compared to the 18 speed. But the 18 speed is absolutely a viable option and will 100% work for doing this. You can make the argument that it would work even better. You get just as much as far as like top speed is concerned, but you get further reduction in these gears here to allow you to get going from a dead stop or to push up the big steep hills even easier. So how does the transmission work? What is it, right? If we come down here, we can see our transmission. Let me close this. So there's our transmission, there's our engine, and there's our drive shaft. So basically, the engine has pistons inside of cylinders, an explosion occurs at the top of the piston and pushes the piston up and down. In a V8, it's a bit out of an angle, right? So you have pistons facing this direction, pistons facing this direction. So pushes those pistons down. Those pistons are connected via rods to a crankshaft. And because of the shape of the crankshaft, the up-down motion of the piston is translated into circular motion of the crankshaft, causes the crankshaft to rotate. Now that crankshaft is connected through a series of parts. There's flywheels, there's clutch plates, maybe a torque converter for an automatic transmission, but it's basically connected to the input shaft on the transmission. Now, the input shaft is usually up top in the higher end inside the transmission, and there is an output shaft on the bottom part of the transmission, or in the bottom part of the transmission. The input shaft, if you want to think about it simply, the input shaft basically has one gear on it. The output shaft has a bunch, and the output shaft gears are all different shape, well, not shapes, sometimes shapes, but all different sizes. So that's where these reductions come into play here. So if we have a look, we can see in the 13 speed, we're just going to focus on the low gear here. It's got a 12.5 reduction. What does that mean? So that means that the input shaft in the transmission has to spin 12.5 times in order for the output shaft to spin once. So as you come up through the gears here, that number gets less and less until it becomes less than 1. And that's where you find all your top speed. The lower end is where you find all your torque. In the 18 speed, and this is why the 18 speed is absolutely viable, and again, some would argue that it's even better. In low 1, you get a 14.71 reduction. So what that means, again, is that input shaft coming off of the crankshaft of the engine has to spin 14.71 times in order for the output shaft to spin once. The output shaft is connected directly to the drive shaft, and the drive shaft is connected to your differentials back here. So more revolutions of the input shaft to turn the output shaft means that the engine's going to have an easier time of doing it. It's able to spool up easier. And as you can see here, you get a peak torque at about 1180 RPM, according to our dyno chart. And then it falls off, but you get nothing below that. And this truck idles around, I want to say 600 or 700 RPM. So in a low gear, it's easier to get up to the RPM necessary to find this peak torque. And then as you climb through the revolutions of the engine, you start to lose torque. Obviously, you want to try to stay around if you're stuck, or if you need to climb a really steep hill. You want to try to get to this peak torque as quickly as you can, and it's much easier to do so in a gear with a bigger reduction. Hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free, leave a comment, post it on the Discord. I'll be posting this in the Motortown Discord for everyone to see. So if anything I say is wrong, or if you have any tips or tricks or anything you want to talk about as far as this video is concerned, feel free, drop a comment on the video or reply to the post in the Discord. If you see me in a server, hit me up about it. I'm totally open to having conversations about this and learning more. But yeah, that's basically how transmissions work. Like I said, 13 speed works for me. The final drive ratio that I have selected makes this more than good enough for climbing the steepest hills along the trail with the heaviest loads. It doesn't really struggle all that much. You could even get away with taking a shorter final drive, and we'll talk about what these numbers mean here in a second, but you can even get away with taking a shorter final drive, i.e. a bigger number, to make those hills even easier. And then in the 18 speed, if you decide to use that, you could even get away with taking a taller final drive, i.e. a smaller number, just to get you more top speed if you really wanted. I don't think it's necessary, so this is a good balance for me. It allows me to climb the very steepest hills at the very heaviest weights with the 13 speed. But let's talk about final drive ratio and what that is. So you have your drive shaft here. It's connected to your differentials. final drive ratio basically refers to how many times the drive shaft needs to spin in order for the wheels to spin once. So with a 4.5 reduction, the drive shaft spins 4.5 times in order for the wheel to spin once. Pretty straightforward. Like I said, 4.56 works for me. You could get away with a bigger number, i.e. a shorter final drive, just to make those hills a little bit easier. I wouldn't go any higher or any taller than the 4.56. If you're doing heavy iron runs, you're going to struggle. You might get stuck on the hills. Differentials. Okay, this could potentially get a little bit long-winded. So like I said, if you already kind of know how this works, feel free to skip ahead. But I'm going to kind of explain what differentials are, how they work in a way, and what this stuff means. So let's talk about lock differentials. It's the simplest, right? It's the easiest to explain. So basically what a lock differential is, or what it means, is that both of these sides are going to be forced to spin at the same speed no matter what. They're going to receive the same amount of power no matter what, and they are locked to each other. The left and the right side are locked to each other. Now, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that this is the best option for off-road. Typically, that is the right way to think about it. However, it is very, very good for low-speed off-road environments where there's a whole bunch of bumps and differences in traction, as far as maybe there's some mud over here on the right side of the road and it's dry over here on the left side. Having both of the sets of wheels receive the same amount of torque all the time means typically for that kind of environment, you're going to have the most traction. Now, in this application, we're not just sticking to low speed technical off-road environments. There are some high speed sections, there are some medium speed sections where you need to corner, and a lock differential is bad in those situations because both of these wheels spinning at the same speed means instability in turns. So for example, let's say we're in a right-hand turn. The inside wheel needs to spin slower than the outside wheel. The outside wheel has to travel faster because it has more ground to travel. It needs to go a further distance. So in a lock differential, one of these wheels is either going to be forced to overspeed or underspeed. In a right-hand turn, it could be that the right side is forced to overspeed, or the left side is forced to underspeed. Now, that means a loss in traction. It's not spinning at the speed that it needs to in order to maintain good contact with the ground. And that means instability. The tail is going to get happy. It's going to start to get a little drifty. That's a lot of fun, but it's not very fast, right? And the idea is to do the heaviest loads as fast as we can, make the most money. So I would not recommend a lock differential for this application, but it is very good in slow speed environments and also in vehicles like the Dummies that only have one set of wheels. This having dual wheels set up on both axles means that there's a whole lot of traction per side anyway, so you can get away with taking a limited slip, and we'll get into that, what a limited slip is, but you can absolutely run a limited slip in this. I've been doing it. This is what I use, the 1.5. Works a treat. Have no problems as far as climbing or instability. It just works. So let's move on to the one-way clutch pack LSD. We're going to talk about these numbers here in a second, but let's break it down a little bit. LSD stands for limited slip differential. Now, what is that? So in a lock differential, both of these wheels are forced to spin at the same speed all the time, no matter what. The inverse of a lock differential is an open differential. In an open differential, the two sides are free to spin independently of each other all the time. An LSD is kind of a middle ground there. So it allows a limited amount of slip before a mechanism engages in order to either send more torque to one side or cut torque from another. There's all sorts of different configurations and ways of manufacturing and building limited slips. They all work kind of differently from one another, but the idea is the same in that it's trying to maintain some semblance of traction for both sides. So clutch pack just refers to the actual configuration of the differential. So essentially there's a bunch of clutch plates in here with some bevel gears and whatnot, and that's kind of how it works. There's a whole bunch of different ways, like I said, to build these things. So clutch pack doesn't really mean anything in this setting for this game, but it's just it's a cool nomenclature. So one way, that refers to the direction of torque for that limiting action to be engaged. So let's break that down. In a one-way limited slip differential, you need to be accelerating for that limiting action to engage. So say you're pinning it and the left side breaks free. If you have enough torque being input to the differential in order for that limiting action to occur, it will either send more torque to the side with traction or not allow torque to travel to the side that doesn't have traction. Now in this game, I believe what these numbers are referring to, this 50 here, is talking about the amount of torque allowed to the wheel or to the side that doesn't have traction. So in the one-way LSD, if you were applying enough torque to the differential in order for that limiting action to occur and the left side were to lose traction, it would cause the left side to receive 50% of the torque, while the right side received 100% of the torque being input on the differential. So basically what that means is the side that is losing traction is going to be underpowered compared to the side that has traction, and that will both allow the side that is losing traction to slow down while the side that still has traction to speed up and catch up to this speed. So it restores traction, restores equilibrium, and that means stability. We like that. Two-way refers to, again, that direction. In a two-way limited slip differential, you get the limiting action if there's enough torque applied to the differential, both under acceleration and under deceleration. So why this is good for many different things is because of engine braking. Now, engine braking occurs when say you're coming along down the highway and you're coming up to an intersection. You need to slow down. So you begin to apply brakes and you downshift the vehicle. When you downshift, the revolutions climb, the revolutions of the engine. You see that on your tachometer. They shoot up, and that inputs torque onto the differential. And it physically tries to slow the differential down, causing the wheels to slow down. So in a two-way limited slip differential, it will allow that limiting action to occur under deceleration as well. So if one of these sides were to lose traction, that limiting action under deceleration can also occur. In a one-way, under deceleration, it essentially acts as an open differential again. In this game, the way they have this two-way limited slip set up, it's for drifting. So regardless of what's going on between the sides, each side is always going to receive 100% of the torque being input on the differential. And that's good for drifting because, say the left side, you're under heavy acceleration, the left side breaks free, it's going to keep getting all of the torque that it did in the first place. And the right side is also going to receive all of the torque that it did in the first place. That creates instability. One side is loose, the other side has traction. That's going to cause the rear to start to skate around a little bit, which is exactly what you want in drifting. You want the rear to get sideways and the car to stay sideways. So quick edit here, guys. The way the two-way LSD differs from the lock differential, if it wasn't obvious, is that the two-way needs a torque input in order for that limiting action to occur. The lock differential is just always locked regardless. So if you install the two-way clutch pack LSD into a vehicle while you're coasting, those wheels aren't going to be locked together. If you just are driving around at normal speeds, following the speed limit, not dumping a bunch of throttle, not getting too high up in the revs, it will act more like an open diff in that it will allow some slip between the two sides, whereas the lock differential will not. It will always, always, always keep these wheels matched. So just wanted to clarify that. And now we're going to get into the 1.5 and I'll explain how that works. The 1.5, so this works a bit like, actually exactly like the two-way, in that that limiting action is applied both under acceleration and under deceleration, but the rate is different for acceleration versus deceleration. So in this example, in this game, under acceleration, if one side were to lose traction, it would be allowed 50% of the torque applied on the differential. Under deceleration, it would receive 30% of the torque. So why is that good for our application? Why do I use it? Basically, it's the best option for kind of what we're doing here. There is very slow speed sections of the trail where a lock differential will work better, but we don't need a lock differential simply because we have all this traction and all these wheels, all these tires being on the ground. And there are also high speed sections where we're going to be cornering, and with a lock differential, that just wouldn't be good. The other potential option is the one-way, but the 1.5 way is just a bit better in that it also helps under deceleration. It will help maintain some stability while you're decelerating using the engine brake, and we have an enhanced engine brake in the Atlas with the Jake brake. So it's just, in my opinion, the best option. It's been working for me. I haven't had any issues with it, but hopefully that kind of made sense how I explained that. Like I said, if you guys have any questions about any of this stuff, feel free, drop a comment, hit me up on Discord or in the server or whatever, and I'd be happy to have a conversation, maybe further explain some stuff, or again, if you have any corrections for how this stuff works, please feel free. I'm running the 1.5 way in both rear axles. I've heard of people doing the lock differential in the front axle. I believe I have my HUD turned off here, so let's see. Yeah, I've heard of people doing that, the lock differential in the front. That works. I haven't tried it. I know people use it, and it works for them. Really, all that's going to do is make the rear end a little bit more lively during cornering, especially at speed. So if you like that driving style, and if you kind of want a little bit more of a handful, then by all means, go for that. You can also get away with running the lock differential in both of the axles. That is totally fine. Like I said, it's going to be much more of a handful. It will want to break free and get sideways a lot more. And if you like that, go for it. I'm after stability because traction means more speed. This thing does not go fast sideways, right? So brakes, man, this is pretty simple, right? So this value is based off of the stock value of the brakes. It comes with 100% braking power. You can bump it all the way to 200. I do. That is effectively the clamping power of the calipers on the pads. We're big and we're heavy, so we need as much braking as we can get. If you're not running ABS, you can lock it up a bit easier with the 200%, but I run ABS simply because I don't like kind of the drama of the thing breaking sideways while I'm cruising down a hill and trying to get it slowed. ABS tends to help with that, but with 200% braking power, even with ABS, it does still kind of lock the back wheels up a little bit and kind of lets it get sideways. So brake pads, this is pretty simple. You get your basic ones. They have a max temp of 752. The Bravo X1s, a max temp of 842. They will heat up 5% slower, they cool 10% faster, and they wear 10% slower. The Delta X1s, a max temp of 752. They heat up just as quickly as the basics, they cool 10% slower, and then they wear 30% slower than the basics. I got a little bit of a mix here. Put the upgraded ones on if you can afford it and you want to. I haven't really seen too much of an issue. If you're kind of taking the trail the right way and you know it pretty well, you won't really overheat your brakes anyway. I think I chose what I chose simply because at some point when I was figuring it out, I was noticing the brakes were starting to smoke a little bit. I believe in the rear. So that's why I put the BX1s in the back there, because they heat up a little bit slower and they have higher max temp. And I wasn't really having an issue with the fronts, which kind of surprised me. Typically the front is responsible for more of the braking power than the rear, but I was noticing that the rears were smoking up. So I did what I did to kind of alleviate that, but I don't think your brakes over temping are too big of a deal for this run. It's not really going to give you any issues if it does happen. So quick edit here, guys. I've been making this video over the course of a couple of days. It's a whole lot to talk about and my brain gets kind of fried. I've been playing the game in the meantime as well, but I just wanted to address why the money is different. That is because I have changed up some of the components here. I've gone with different anti-roll bars in the front and softer springs, softer suspension spring in the front. I'll get into the reasons why as I kind of go through and explain what these components are, what they do, why I picked what I picked. But I just wanted to take a quick note and let you know that the build has changed. I will be uploading this to the workshop and posting the code in the video description as well as in the Discord post when I upload the video there. If you are watching this and you do have the older version of this tune, I believe the code was 45420. First off, thank you so much. That is awesome. Anybody who asks, I tell them that I have a tune and it works well. It's really cool to see the paint scheme out and about and to see you guys using the tune. That's so awesome to me and I really appreciate it. Please know that none of what I did really affects the overall capability. That old tune isn't obsolete or anything like that. Really, it was a quality of life change to address some of the unwanted tendencies I was noticing with the truck along the route because of the way that I drive. So let's get into this. Let's talk about anti-roll bars first. What are they? What do they do? Come to the rear here, we can see the ones in the back. There's one. There is the other. And it's in the name, right? Anti-roll. Now, unfortunately, that does not mean you can throw the 200% on all the way around and the truck will stay perfectly planted to the ground forever and ever and never flip over again. Anti-roll bars are responsible for mitigating the amount of body roll that occurs on a vehicle. So what is body roll? So let's say we're approaching a right-hand turn. As we come up, we start to apply steering input and Newton's first law of motion, right? Inertia. Everything wants to keep going in the same direction that it's been going. So as we start to steer the truck to the right, the load is going to shift to the left. And that is going to cause the suspension components to do their job. This side, the inside, will start to decompress. The outside will start to compress. And the cargo bed and the cab in this truck will start to roll over. With softer anti-roll bars, that amount of deflection between the sides is allowed to be higher. With stiffer anti-roll bars, the amount of deflection is lower. Now, with softer anti-roll bars, yes, the inside wheels stay on the ground longer, but what can happen is as the load shifts more and more, the inside wheels start to pick up off the ground, and because that load has shifted so much, the rolling action as the wheels come up off the ground is very fast. So you don't get a whole lot of warning in the way of, oh man, my tires have left the ground, I better do something about this. It just sort of snaps over and flips. Another thing you'll see with softer anti-roll is as you exit a turn, because that deflection is allowed to happen more and there's less damping from the anti-roll bars being softer, you can get some oscillations as you come out. So all of the weight, all of the load has shifted to the left. As you exit the turn, that weight shifts back to the right and causes body roll in that direction, and it kind of oscillates, which creates some instability. With stiffer anti-roll bars, the amount of deflection allowed is significantly less. Now, yes, that does mean that these inside wheels will come off the ground even quicker, but that's actually easier to control because the load hasn't shifted so much at that point, and the body isn't hanging off of the frame, if you will. You can kind of see it happening a bit sooner, and you can input countersteering in order to correct it. And as you exit the turn, those oscillations that you might see with a softer anti-roll bar don't occur. It helps to dampen that shift in weight back to the right and reduces those oscillations. So in the rear, I run 200%. That's because that's where most of the weight is. The change that I have made is for the, actually let me turn my HUD on here so we can see what we're talking about. The change that I have made is for the front. I am now running 120 in the very front axle and 150 in the second axle there. And the reason I did that, quality of life change that I was looking for. I noticed that the truck tended to push through some of the turns and understeer. And again, that is something that happens because of the way that I drive. I tend to brake pretty late into corners, which is probably not an ideal technique when you're driving a big heavy truck, but it's what I do. So to mitigate some of that understeer, you can run softer anti-roll bars in the front and stiffer anti-roll bars in the rear, and that will promote oversteer. Oversteer is more manageable. The back end kicking out and kind of pointing the nose into the turn is easier to deal with than the front tires just pushing through the turn and the truck not turning at all. So with these changes, I'm trying to induce a little more oversteer and cut down on some of that understeer. Suspension springs, what are they? What do they do? In this truck, we have leaf springs. In other vehicles, you can have coils, coilovers, all sorts of fun stuff. So essentially what the suspension springs do is absorb some of the shock and vibration that you get from the road. Obviously, it's a spring, so as the wheel travels upward, the spring compresses, and as the wheel travels downward, the spring decompresses. The values here, again, are based off of the stock spring stiffness, which of course is 100%. This being a dump truck, its intended use is to haul heavy things, so the stock springs were already fairly stiff. I've seen some people run 300, 400, 500% in these trucks and have no issues, and they like it. I found that at those values, it was very bouncy. Now, that's mitigated by the dampers. We'll talk about that when we get there, but at the higher values, I noticed that the truck was bouncy. I'm running 200% in the rears, 150 in this second axle here, and 120 in the front. The 200% seems to handle the very heavy iron loads well. You don't see a lot of sagging occurring, and it feels kind of how it should. At the higher values, 300, 400, 500%, like I said, it was bouncy. You do get that with lighter iron loads and coal, but anything really over, I don't know, 50-ton gross vehicle weight, the truck drives nicely. There's not a ton of bounce or anything like that. The reason I went from 200% all the way around to 150 at this second axle and 120 at this front axle is in conjunction with the anti-roll bars. Softening the front a bit will help induce more of that oversteer. It lets the load shift to the front because, like I said, I brake late. So it lets more of the load shift to the front, which is going to push down on these tires and provide them more traction. And also lift load from these tires and allow them a little bit less traction. So it's going to help with that oversteer that I'm looking for. Will mitigate some of that understeer that I've been seeing. I did try it with one run. It did seem to help. Unfortunately, my power went out, so I wasn't able to complete the delivery, but it did seem to lend in the idea that the changes would induce a bit more oversteer and reduce some of that understeer I was seeing. Suspension dampers, what are they? What do they do? I don't know anymore, man. I think these are there in their illustration of shock absorbers. Suspension dampers effectively reduce the speed at which the wheels will travel up and down. So these work directly in conjunction with the springs as far as ride comfort, bump mitigation, bounciness, all that good stuff, right? So say we're cruising along at a decent speed and we hit a big bump. The wheel is going to want to shoot upwards and the spring is going to push it downwards because the spring is compressing as the wheel travels up, and it will decompress, pushing the wheel downward as you get over the bump. The damper controls the rate of speed that wheel is allowed to travel. So with more damping, that wheel speed up and down is effectively slowed. Now, it's a little more complicated than that, but for the sake of the game, we can kind of simplify it. I'm running 500% all the way around. This is typical of off-road vehicles. You usually see off-road vehicles, one, lifted to the moon. We'll talk about ride height. That's really simple. I just cranked it through the roof. Anyway, you see off-road vehicles lifted, and they typically have softer suspension with more damping. That is because softer suspension can handle bumps better. It's more comfortable. It reduces the amount of drama and instability because of bumps, and more damping effectively reduces overall bounciness after a bump occurs. So if you think about hitting one bump, say a speed bump, right? We're cruising along, we hit a speed bump. If we were to have very low damping and softer springs, the truck would continue to bounce up and down long after we cleared the bump. If we had very stiff springs, who knows? The truck might get air. But softer springs, the truck would bounce up and down. So with more damping, it reduces that overall bounciness. The truck recovers and is more stable after you experience a bump. So 500% is what I've chosen all the way around. Works good, feels good, easy peasy. Suspension ride height, kind of touched on this already. I shot the thing through the roof. I've seen some people run like 4 in the very front and 6 on the second axle, and then 8 or something for the third and 10 in the back, trying to keep the thing level. If that works for you, by all means, go for it. I found that with a little bit lower ride height in the front, there are some spots along the trail where the front bumper kind of dug and it killed a bunch of speed. So to just get over that and not have to deal with it anymore, I went with a 10 centimeter, and it's not centimeters, right? It's way more than 10 centimeters. I went with 10 centimeters all the way around. Wheel spacers, this is pretty simple, right? So we see the 2s here versus the 100s. You can kind of watch, just pushes the wheels out. A wider distance between the wheels means more stability overall. The truck's going to be less likely to want to roll, and that's pretty much it. I've seen some people run like tripod setups where the front is more narrow than the rear, or the rear is more narrow than the front. Again, I think that's kind of subjective. If it's what you like and it works for how you drive, then by all means, not saying you're wrong at all. This is what works for me, and I dig it. Moving on to the angle kit. Angle kit basically determines how far the wheels will be turned at full lock. So stock is what it is. You got +5 and +10. I don't believe this is degrees. It seems like it's way more than 5 and 10 degrees. This isn't a super necessary upgrade to take. It does make it easier to get in and out of shops and get around town and things like that if you're driving this thing through the towns and through the cities. And there are a couple of switchbacks along the trail where you find that it is beneficial to have that extra steering angle, especially if you overshoot it a little bit. But it's 20 grand, so if money was a limiting factor, you don't need to take this whatsoever. Moving on to tires, I believe I'm running a mix. Let me turn the HUD. Yeah, there we go. I'm running a little bit of a mix here. So we got two options for the front. We have the KMH1s English and the KMH2s. As you can see, the ones have 0.03 G more grip than the 2s, but the 2s have a higher max load. I believe what I've done here is put the 2s in, nope, what is going on? Am I a silly goose? Yes, okay, so the 2s are in the front. The reason for that, at the time anyway, that I kind of came up with this build and was figuring things out. In my mind, that increased max load would allow me to hit gnarlier bumps and the entry of the big steep hills a bit faster and a bit harder without having to worry about blowout. And I was willing to sacrifice a little bit of the grip because all 4 of these wheels turn. So the ones are in the back, they have the more grip. They're not going to be subjected to the same kind of forces as far as like smashing bumps or the bases of the steep hills as the very front axle is. So in my mind, it was like, let's put the max load tires in the front just to deal with the forces and keep the grippier tires in the back to help turn it. I really don't think it makes a difference. You can probably absolutely run the H1s in the front and be totally fine. So in the rear, I have, wait a second, what is going on here? HUD back on, thank you. In the rear, I have the H1s for all the tires. The reasoning behind this is that they have more grip. If we look at the difference here, the max load is pretty substantial, but because we have so many tires back here, it's kind of negligible. I haven't experienced or heard of anybody blowing out their tires doing iron runs, and so I don't think the 2s are necessary at all, even at the peak of weight for iron. I've been running the 1s. I have no issues. Works for me. Wheels. Now, I think for the most part this is cosmetic aside from the weight, but we're going to get into why I picked what I picked. If we look, I have the Atlases and the Cudas installed. Both of those weigh 80 kg. Now that is per wheel. So if we think about the fact that there is 8 wheel per side in the rear, that starts to add up, which is why I think avoiding the like Roadmasters, the Jamusis is probably a good idea. I don't know that 15 kg per wheel in a truck with this much power will make all that much of a difference, and I'm unsure as to whether or not sprung weight versus unsprung weight is a thing factored into this game. If you do know about cars and you're into tuning, you do know that unsprung weight versus sprung weight is an important factor. I'm not sure, and I haven't played around with tuning other cars in this game to figure out if unsprung weight versus sprung weight is legitimately a thing. But just to keep it kind of easy and not worry about it so much, I've gone with the Atlases in the front and the Cudas in the rear. My reasoning for the Cudas in the rear is if you look, you can see that compared to the Atlases, they are slightly wider. They provide a wider contact patch because of a wider tire. Now, I'm pretty sure that this is strictly cosmetic, but in my brain, the wider tire with the bigger contact patch has more grip. So I did that. I also kind of dig the look. If you think it's ugly, feel free, switch them up. But I like it. And like I said, thinking that a wider contact patch in the rear has more grip makes sense in my brain. Again, I think it's cosmetic. Who knows? Aerodynamics, there's really nothing here aside from the front bumper. Ooh. So if we look, here's the stock one. Here's the one that I have installed. It's a little bit taller. It doesn't hang down so low. Again, I think this is another cosmetic thing. And, you know, not that it really matters because of my silly light bar attachment anyway. But it also kind of looks cooler. You know, is what it is, right? Pick which one you want. I don't think it makes a difference. The stock one does hang down a little bit lower, but I don't think it's going to scrape more any more compared to the taller ones. If I'm wrong here, correct me, but I'm pretty sure that's just a cosmetic thing. And then on to etc. We have no other options aside from utility. And I've gone for fuel tanks here. More fuel means more runs without having to stop. Oh yeah, the HUD's turned off. So you can take what you want if you're utilizing utility boxes and putting stuff in there, by all means, but a little bit more fuel just means that you can kind of get away with some more mistakes on the trail without having to worry about hitting that emergency refuel button, which is expensive. Not that iron runs won't completely offset the costs of that anyway, but more fuel, more peace of mind, being able to do more runs. And that is it, guys. Like I said, I'm going to be uploading this fresh build into the workshop in just a second here and posting this video onto YouTube and into the Motortown Discord. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free, hit me up. And thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it.